Today, we're going to unpack some huge, complicated ideas, all hidden inside just one single famous painting. So I want you to just forget about everything else for a second. Just look at this image. It really pulls you in, right? It feels so full of life, so detailed, like you could step right into it. Okay, so what are we looking at? This is The Snake Charmer by a French artist, Jean-Léon Gérôme, painted way back around 1879. And you can see why it's famous. The realism is just incredible, almost like a photograph.
It really feels like we're peeking through a window into a real moment, right? A snapshot from a faraway land. The artist's skill is so good, it feels completely authentic. But, and this is the big question, what if it's all a lie?
All right, let's start picking this apart, because once you look closer, the whole thing starts to unravel. See that snake? Experts think it's probably a boa constrictor from South America. And those gorgeous blue tiles? Yeah, those are based on panels from the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. But the building itself? The architecture is a mashup of Turkish and Egyptian styles. And maybe the biggest tell of all, snake charming wasn't even really a thing in the Ottoman Empire.
So Gérôme has basically created a collage, a total fantasy. He stitched together bits and pieces from all over the place to create a scene that never, ever happened. Which brings us to a much bigger question. Why? What's the point of this beautiful fake?
And to answer that, we need to talk about a really powerful idea, a specific way of seeing the world that shaped, well, pretty much everything for centuries. It's what we call the Orientalist lens. You know, it's no accident that this exact painting was on the cover of a game-changing book that came out in 1978. It was written by a scholar named Edward Said, and the book was called simply Orientalism. And let me tell you, it completely flipped the script on how we understand the relationship between the West and the East. So what on earth is Orientalism? Well, Said's big idea is that it's a kind of cultural fabrication. It's not about the real East, the actual people, the actual places in Asia and the Middle East. Nope, it's a version of the East that was invented by the West for a Western audience. It's a story, a representation, not reality. And this is the key. Said put it perfectly. This whole idea of the Orient tells us way more about the West, its dreams, its fears, its ambitions, than it ever does about the places it's supposedly describing. So when you look through this lens, what do you see? You see a world that's always exotic, mysterious, maybe a little dangerous, definitely sensual. But at the same time, it's also shown as kind of stuck in time, unchanging, and, well, uncivilized. A place that's fundamentally different and, let's be honest, seen as inferior to the modern West. So how did this happen? How was this whole invented world even built? Because it wasn't just a few paintings here and there. Oh no, this was a massive, culture-wide project. Okay, at the very heart of Orientalism is something Said called a binary opposition. It's a fancy term for a simple, powerful idea, us versus them. The West basically defined itself by creating an opposite for the East. So if we are rational, then they must be irrational. If we are modern and dynamic, they must be timeless and stuck. You see how it works? It's a setup that always puts the West on top. This process creates something that thinkers call a simulacrum. Think of it like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, until the original is completely lost. This made-up idea of the Orient, built from all these Western stories and images, became so powerful in people's minds that it actually seemed more real than the actual complex reality of the places and people themselves. And this thing was built by a huge machine, you know? It wasn't just painters like Gérôme. It was academics writing dictionaries, colonial administrators creating laws, popular authors writing thrilling travelogues, and even scientists producing objective studies. All of these different pieces worked together to create this one consistent, powerful image. So, okay, it's a powerful fantasy, got it. But here's where Said's argument gets really crucial. This wasn't just about art and books. This whole cultural project had very, very real-world consequences. It was an instrument of power. I mean, just look at the timeline. It lines up perfectly. 1798, Napoleon invades Egypt. And what does he bring? He brings soldiers, sure, but he also brings this huge army of scholars to study, measure, and catalog everything. This drive to know the Orient was happening at the exact same time as the drive to rule it. The age of Orientalist art was the age of empire. So Painting the East as this irrational place that needed to be saved wasn't just some accidental artistic choice. It was the justification for colonialism. Culture wasn't just sitting on the sidelines. As Said put it, it was productive. It was actively creating the reason, the excuse for imperial control. And the difference between the fantasy and the reality could be just staggering. You had male European artists painting these super sexualized harem scenes, places they had never been and could never go. Total imagination. But then you have someone like Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, an Englishwoman who had actually been to a Turkish bath. And how did she describe it? Basically as a social club, the women's coffee house. I mean, come on, those are two completely different universes.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all feels like ancient history, right? 19th century paintings, colonial empires, who cares? But Said's whole point was that this way of thinking didn't just vanish. It just changed its clothes. And it's absolutely still with us today.
Said argued that after World War II, when the old British and French empires started to crumble, the United States stepped onto the world stage as the new superpower. And when it did, it basically inherited that same Orientalist lens for looking at and understanding the Middle East. The framework just got passed down. He pointed to all these recurring stereotypes you see in movies and TV. You know, the ones, the shady merchant, the exotic dancer, the violent terrorist. He said these weren't just harmless tropes. They kept reinforcing this old idea of a region that was dangerous, irrational, and backward, a place that, surprise, surprise, needed Western intervention to fix it. And that is the bottom line. That's why this matters. From a painting like The Snake Charmer all the way to today's news headlines, this whole system of representation isn't just about pretty pictures or good stories. It has real, lasting effects on politics, on foreign policy, and on the very basic level of how we see other human beings. So, learning about Orientalism gives us a tool, a way to be more critical about the images and stories we're fed every day. And it leaves us with one last really important question to think about. What other invisible lenses, built on stereotypes and assumptions, are shaping the way you and I see the world right now?